Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this now unbelievably important and weekly dialogue with what I am referring to as the new Untouchables, even though they've been around the block quite a bit. And we're recording this on Friday, May 9th, 2025 at approximately 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And to my immediate left, or depending how I look at this when I watch it, maybe to my right, but Paul Peltier, the one and only, the legend. But I don't want to be silly because this has a lot of gravity, especially with some of the dialogue we're going to talk about today, Paul. Paul is an adjunct professor at George Washington University. He's in private practice as well. He ran for Congress, or I should say, as a representative in this great state of Virginia. And before that, had a prolific career in the Department of Justice, which I'm very interested in discussing this afternoon, all things considered. Immediately below Paul is, of course, June Carbone, and she is the Rabina Chair of Science, Technology, and Law at the University of Minnesota. As always, I will include a link to their information and their writings and interviews and so on and so forth. The more information you can gather from these folks, I think the better for all of us. And of course, right below me is none other than William K. Black. William K. Black is a former professor in both criminology and economics, and currently in criminology at the University of Minnesota, formerly of the University of Kansas City, Missouri, in economics and law as well. But prior to that, many, many years in the government, particularly as it related to the savings and loan crisis, of which we've covered on previous discussions, which I will encourage you to explore as well. And who has presented a platform for us all to consider moving forward, considering all the things that are going on. So before we get started, just to let you know, Paul, June just disappeared, but I can pause or bring her back in, or we can, you can just let her know if you want that I can, pause if you prefer.
We're in different rooms, so I can't see her. I can go check on her, but
Okay, what I'll do is I'll just I'll ask you guys some questions to start us off. We'll look for June to join, and if she doesn't join immediately, then I'll push pause after a little bit of dialogue here. But Paul, I'd like to start. We've gotten hit with the tidal wave, of course, as we have each and every week of this Trump administration, and I really appreciated your sentiment going back a couple of weeks when you had laid out that none of us should be surprised. This was all laid out in Project 2025, and we knew what was coming, but still it gets deeper and worse every week. And one of the things that really I think has been the center of a lot of dialogue, particularly as it relates to corruption, is the magnitude of Pam Bondi's state of play as the Attorney General of the United States, and of course the Department of Justice. And because you've had many, many decades working within the Department of Justice, I thought maybe that you could start us off by just kind of giving some of your reactions to what you're seeing.
Well, it's probably the same. Well, thank you for having me on, Patrick. It's probably sort of the same reaction that most people have to what they're saying, and that is simply that prior to this administration, attorney generals took an oath in office to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States of America. They represent the American citizens and not the President of the United States. They're not the attorney for the president. I think when Obama first came into office, he went to the Attorney General, went to U.S. attorneys' offices, told everyone, "You're not my lawyer, right? You represent the people of the United States. We are independent agencies," and it's very important in the Department of Justice that be both clear and true, because it is the message to people in the country that everybody is going to be treated fairly, and the president's whims or desires of how to conduct lawfare won't be possible. And so what we see in this Department of Justice, and what has just been rankling me since almost day one, is that the parade of prosecutors going before justices to articulate not the position of the Constitution, not the position of the law, but the position that the president has articulated, regardless of whether or not it fails in the face of direct constitutional principles or direct legal principles. And prosecutors willing to do that, it just defies both logic and my understanding and most people's understandings of what the department is really supposed to be doing.
Well, it's interesting behind you. I don't know for this for sure, but I see a tall building behind you, and it seems like you may be in Miami, which was, and I see blue skies and kind of tropical clouds there. Am I right?
Yeah, I'm in Miami.
Okay, which is intriguing because you spent a great deal of your career there, really getting inside and being very innovative, knowing things that Bill Black has been calling for and has called for recently about being very innovative about how to handle organized crime. Of course, your career spanning decades, but going back really to the vectors of international crime, particularly as it related to the go-go 80s in Miami in drug dealing. And those of us from that era remember, of course, things like Scarface, that would illuminate some of the crazy things that were happening down there. Can you address the challenge, given all of the challenges have you seen throughout your career, not to mention what we know about AIG and towards the end of your career at the Department of Justice. But it seems to me like if things were hard before, to deal with structuring a response for the people of the United States within this Department of Justice, considering things that we're watching Pam Bondi do on a daily
Yeah,
basis.
right.
Can you even characterize that?
It's very hard to. So I, like Bill, I had a wonderful career in government before this. And what made it so wonderful is that we were taught by supervisors and leaders who actually believed in the legal system, the system of justice, the notions of fair play, and that type of thing. And throughout my career, up until sort of the end, it continued to play out in a way that was designed to make the biggest impact possible on the biggest number of people possible. What's amazing, what becomes even more amazing now is, and this happened yesterday, right? The president withdrew the name of this fellow named Martin, who was a J6er, who he wanted to nominate to be the U.S. attorney in D.C. We know that that person had been running roughshod over the rights of both private industry, private government, and anything that came in his way. And he would send letters that were absolutely absurd to people about he would put them under federal investigation if they didn't comply with his requests or demands in the letters. I mean, these are things that are just off the charts of what I knew and understood the Department of Justice stood for. And if my U.S. attorney ever did something like that, I would expect they'd be on the front page of the news and they'd be fired the next day. Not only was this guy encouraged to do that, he was nominated to be the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia after a track record of doing crazy stuff like that, and cavorting with known racists and white supremacists. So it is something that is not familiar to me. What they're completely reactionary to what the president wants as to what the Constitution demands or that the law demands. And so we're off the charts of what the Department of Justice stands for or is supposed to stand for. So it's really hard to get my arms around defining what it is, but at every step it's wrong. And it's not, and it's a very bad thing because the American people for years have learned to depend on the Department of Justice as sort of the arbiter of fairness. And of course, there's been ups and downs in that. But at the end of the day, it was generally through incompetence. Now, what we've had infiltrate the Department of Justice is what I would call capital C corruption. And that's really what's going on here. And I'm certainly would be interested in hearing June's take on that, and certainly Bill's as well.
Well, that will be the question to you both, and I'm going to ask you both to kind of consider running with that. But I do want to set this up from this perspective. Finally, guys, there are a lot of people starting to talk about corruption, but they're not talking about corruption the way you guys talk about corruption. Why? Well, because you're experts. You've spent decades in the field. You've dealt with the biggest fraud in the history of the United States. And now people think this is even bigger than what's become before. I think it's, from where I'm sitting, given the work that we've done together, seemingly a natural conclusion to what I've been learning from you guys all along. And so I'd like to maybe ask both you, June, and Bill, and just kind of fill in each other's blanks or however this might go. But again, when we're talking about plutocrats, when we're talking about billion-dollar apparatuses that have seemingly found a way through all of these mechanics, this methodology of, smoke and mirrors and behind the scenes and legislation to do things that we've talked about throughout this panel discussion, to do things, for example, influence the Supreme Court of the United States, to have a continuous control of the Congress, to now, after this runaway train wreck that, of course, was predicted in Project 2025, and I can't get that out of my mind, and all things that preceded it. But again, the natural conclusion, because if you were to ask people decades ago, is it possible for a runaway criminal billionaire class to control the institutions of the United States? I think most of us would think that would have been impossible. But we've seen a progression, of course, from Eric Holder through Bill Barr, through Merrick Garland, and now Pam Bondi. And as the two of you guys had spent a lot of time at the Department of Justice, and honor has been such a monumental consideration, particularly from you, June, about how things operate in the United States. Can you pick up on what Paul just mentioned and maybe share your thoughts about how this thing seems to be going from bad to worse very quickly?
Sure. And I want to emphasize something that the shift started at least by 1980, if not earlier. And the shift, which I've seen across society, is a shift from institutionalized power to personalized power. It started in business. And so we have a friend who's an entrepreneur in San Francisco, quite wealthy, very successful. And when we used to talk about this, and Bill would describe the same things he's describing today, 20 years ago, our friend thought Bill was nuts, extremist, exaggerated. And at some point, at least more than 10 years ago, he said, before Trump, he said, Bill is right. And my experience when I have given talks about my book, which describes the fate, it describes how lawless workplaces disadvantage women. And I was a little nervous about speaking to audiences, some of the audiences Bill speaks to, of economists and business types. And I sometimes get pushback on the solutions. I never get pushback on the story. They tell me the story we presented, personalized power, the rewards go to those who break the rules and get away with it. The people at the top orchestrate the institutions to accomplish short-term reductionist results that make them very, very wealthy. I got no pushback on that. And so what I am seeing, and we saw the beginnings of it when Bill and I were at the Justice Department many years ago. The fifth floor, meaning the Attorney General and the top aides, referred to us, the line attorneys in the Civil Division, as the munchkins, the little people who didn't necessarily fall in line when they barked orders. And we had the sense that Paul has described of our client is the United States. It is not the agencies. We will try to do what the agencies want, but the rule of law comes first. These are not murder cases. They are not rampant corruption cases. These are the day-to-day workings of the civil division who is on the front line of implementing a lot of what Trump is doing. And we took very seriously that we could not engage in the tactics private lawyers engaged in, that we were loyal to a higher cause. And one of the things that you are seeing, and I see it in the academy, but take a look at who Trump and Musk target. And they are the last people left who are motivated by something other than their annual bonus. So in the academy, we have merit pay. It's a joke. I'm quite happy with my salary, but if I wanted to earn more, what I need to do is move, not perform better, but be a bigger figure nationally, and get invited to go to another school that will pay me more to jump ship. And if the offer is high enough, I would be a fool not to take it. But I will tell you, I came to Minnesota from UMKC, where I was very happy and better for my family, because what I saw was the business mindset take over the university. The board of trustees and the top chancellor, who's always a businessman in Missouri, not an academic, have the mindset you're worth what we pay you. If you're not being paid that much, that means you aren't very good. And they made it very easy getting a much nicer offer from Minnesota to take it because the chancellor of the university and the board of trustees were in effect saying to us, if you don't take it, you're a fool. Now, once you start with that mindset, that what confers prestige is how much money you have, like Mitt Romney in the Cayman Islands. And if you can break the rules and get away with it, you're better than those who follow the rules, who are chumps. Once that mindset dominates corporate America, and there are billions to be made from that mindset, then what comes with it, what gets you to the top, and what stays with you once you are there is incredible arrogance. And so I have been stunned by the change in the Supreme Court in my lifetime. And part of what I'm struck by is the Supreme Court now feels embattled. Their feelings have been hurt. We criticize them. But what you see openly from Alito, to a lesser degree from Thomas, but implicitly by most of the conservatives on the court, is the mindset. We are not justices of the United States. We are avengers. But whose avengers? For Samuel Alito, who is openly a Christian nationalist, it is to avenge the wrong done to my people, white Christians who are opposed to things like marriage equality. And Alito breaks all the rules of being on the court. He says out loud, oh, the Biden administration did that to get around some ruling of ours they don't like. Therefore, we should owe them no respect whatsoever. This is a mindset that is partisan, that views it as a game in which scoring points on the opposition is what counts, who view themselves as the embattled champions of a minority of the country. That ought to be disqualifying to be a member of the Supreme Court. I can go through the others, but even Roberts, the institutionalist, Roberts at various times has defended the court, saying they're not really partisan. They don't see whether this advantages Republicans, but many are ideological. He's now describing himself. When you look at the shaping of the justices on the Supreme Court, most of them were Federalist Society members by the time they graduated from law school. Many of them served in the Reagan administration in the early years. And the mindset, why are they on the court? To repeal the New Deal. To repeal well-established precedent that has served the country incredibly well. And they're there to overturn it, to make the world safe for billionaires. I have described in print the Supreme Court as embodying the mindset that they're there to protect the great men who are hemmed in by Lilliputians. Who are the Lilliputians? Prosecutors. People like Paul and Bill. Regulators. They don't believe the great men, including themselves, should be hemmed in by the rule of law. They feel free to make it up, to serve whatever they think the interests are. And the only difference on the court are those like John Roberts, who have some sense of how his ideology serves the country, and at least in his own mind, and those like Alito, who only are about grievance. But all of them are partisans, not necessarily partisan Republicans, partisans for a view of what the law should be that is their view, not the view embedded in history, in precedent, in the Constitution, but the view that they get to make it up. make it up on the basis of their convictions. And that's incredibly radical. And one of the things it has done is they never meet a white-collar criminal they don't want to let out of jail. They even overturned Jeff Skilling's conviction. The lower court simply reinstated it, but on other grounds. They didn't defy the court, but they said, okay, we're still sending him to jail. And I think that should be shocking. The court does not establish the rule of law. There's a new book by Leah Littman at Michigan about to come out called Lawless, and I'm upset she stole the title. Uh, I've been wanting to use that title to describe the court's actions in a number of fields for years.
Wow, Bill, I'm going to use that just to segue to you real quick because I find it fascinating, all things considered, that Mr. Peltier, who has been a subject of one of the most prolific, and I know I've used that word quite a bit over the course of the last couple of weeks, but one of my favorite documentarians, a gentleman by the name of Alex Gibney. Alex Gibney has done really incredible work, starting with, of course, I think his claim to fame was Enron, the smartest guys in the room, which of course ties together Jeff Skilling and of course what Paul had initially been involved with many years ago. But the recent revelations from Mr. Gibney on HBO is a television series that I think is very important and informative, and it's called Dark Money, and it was built upon the work of a fabulous journalist that came out of the Atlantic and the New Yorker, a woman whose name eludes me and it'll come back to me in a moment. But I've been reading her for years. But as well designed and structured to reveal the mechanics at play that June just described, it falls far short of control fraud. It falls short, very short from being able to build. And I always liken it to a racketeering case, just from a producer's point of view, right? Okay, you flip the guy on below and bigger, and you get to the guys at the highest rungs, which turn out to be the CEOs. And for this conversation, I think we can call them, as you have recently, plutocrats. So when we're looking at this structure of what has hijacked our democracy and people trying to race to try to formulate how they respond to it, particularly using the big word, the big C, corruption, right? They tend to try to compare it to autocrats in places like Hungary, like Viktor Orban, or maybe some of the things, of course, that happened in Russia, i.e., Putin, and how he leveraged the big money and, he would kill billionaires eventually. But at the same time, the structure is not the model that enables them to control the business apparatuses of this country, whether it's in financial, real estate, insurance, and so forth. They're missing the methodology. And by doing so, by focusing completely on Trump, we're missing the plutocrats, are we not?
Yeah, so the sort of the definition among professors of what makes you really a professor is the ability to hold two things at least that are in tension, right? The world isn't so simple. And so let's take these two things in tension that both Paul and June have been talking about. As June said, all the folks that run the university system in Missouri are business people. But what she didn't add explicitly, though, it was that they're all failed businessmen, right? That bankrupted their companies because that frees them up for these kinds of positions. This is very much the Musk thing, right? People assume people who came from top positions in business are great business people. They're often terrible business people, but they are extraordinarily connected such that even when they fail upwards in a what sense into these positions of respect. So Paul and I have both been involved in dealing with true epidemics of control, fraud, and predation, right? Really major corporations, and they're scary as all hell. They're even scarier from the regulatory sense often than the prosecutorial sense, because generally speaking, the prosecutors get them after the corporation has collapsed, right? That's not always true, but we're dealing with them as regulators while they're still growing massively and reporting record profits. And every month that we're not able to stop that, the losses expand. So, again, in the savings and loan crisis, 1984, there were 300 savings and loans growing more than 50% a year. And every one of them reports record profits. Well, if you grow at more than 50% of a year, here's what the growth rate looks
Hockey stick.
like a hockey stick. And so we're feeling acutely as regulators every month that we cannot act to stop this, the catastrophe is getting greater. Now, the so-called dark, deep state, this is in many ways aspects of it the absolute greatest strength of the United States of America. It's the people that Paul has been describing, the people that June was describing, who are committed to following the rule of law. And let me give you the differential power. Thus, for terrible reasons explained in the con, the federal government in the run up to the great financial crisis did not simply fail to stop at the regulatory level this hockey stick of disaster, even though they had our experience and knew exactly what these fraudsters were doing, right? They had you would have thought, the benefit of all the years of success and all the years of success by the Department of Justice in literally getting 5,000 felony convictions in the contemporaneous savings and loan and banking crisis. And that's only in cases designated as major by the Justice Department. Okay? But they didn't. They didn't stop them at all. That was terrible. But what was worse, and again, the con goes through this in terrible detail, because, I mean, terrible in the sense of painful. It is so painful to watch. The federal government preempted, the regulatory agencies, wherever possible, preempted state efforts, like people like Mark Dan, to take action, with the exception of Mark Dan. And he is the only one that I know of. There may be a couple others at the state AG level. They didn't get criminal convictions against any of the big lenders that were going to lead to the great financial crisis. It took all of it, well, not all of them, but all of them that were cooperating, which was roughly 15 state AGs. Think of that. So that was all the state capacity used that was willing to be used. They couldn't get a conviction other than Mark of one important but relatively small player, right? Compared to the folks that were driving the disaster. And that was a heroic effort to get the civil actions, the administrative actions that helped cause these huge looting schemes to blow up a little quicker than they otherwise would have, like a year. But again, when you're in the stick part of the hockey stick, if you shave a year of growth off, you save billions of dollars for the public. Okay? It is really hard to bring these cases. Anybody that says this is easy is sometimes they're lying, but usually they just don't know what they're talking about, right? And to make these cases, it takes years, years of experience of the kind Paul was developing and his counterparts in my era that I worked with at the Department of Justice. But it also takes, and Paul and I have talked about this in the past, training. And it takes real discipline in bringing what we call rifle shot prosecutions because these guys commit tens of thousands of frauds. Actually, they commit hundreds of thousands in the case of the really big ones. Think of that. Hundreds of thousands of cases of fraud to maximize the overall fraud scheme. And so it takes a really gutsy, experienced prosecutor not to prosecute everything, to take the whatever, the six best ones that will get us the relief we need. And so, and that's just part of the partnership, the FBI and especially the IRS forensic accountants. These are national treasures that save billions of dollars every year. And if they were allowed to be used properly, which Congress prevents, they would save tens of billions of dollars. And let me just put it in international contrast. The next most famous law enforcement entity against elite white collar crime is the Serious Fraud Office of the United Kingdom. And you know how many successes they've had? Pretty damn close to zero. They actually paid to get a former U.S. prosecutor to become a judge to review them, which is a really good thing to have that kind of outside review. And her conclusion was they had de facto decriminalized elite white collar crime. We have done that now. We have done that under the Obama administration in some sectors, the great financial crisis. The results are terrible. But the same Justice Department in the savings and loan and the banking scandals of the 80s and 90s, and in the Enron era frauds, racked up track records that vastly exceed all the other legit prosecutions, righteous we would use in our parlance, in the rest of the world combined for elite financial criminals. And that is what we have destroyed. We know how to succeed. Obama refused to allow us to succeed. And the result is there are thousands of elite predators that have gotten away with it. And they, and even bigger sharks than they, have taken over the government of the United States. And the first thing they did was go after everybody in the justice or apparatus, the ethical apparatus, the whistleblowers that could cause them problems. So God bless the deep state in the sense of what used to be willing to put the president's best buddies in prison, which it did in the Watergate affair and took on the Attorney General of the United States eventually and such. Were there scandals in the dark state? Yes. J. Edgar Hoover was a monster. He did terrible things. And sometimes the prosecutors allowed that as well. In the Clinton administration, the number 3 guy in the Justice Department was arrested and convicted, pled guilty to a whole series of frauds. So it ain't perfect, but we always in the past had people willing, even when we got terrible apples right at the top of the damn tree, to refuse to assist those frauds and, in fact, put the elite fraudsters in prison, even if they came from the Justice Department.
I'm going to pick up there, Mark. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to circle back to you in a minute because I need to tee this up for Paul real quick, because your ears must have been burning, by the way, because Bill just gave you a great compliment because of the job, of course, you did, that we were so fortunate to explore and discover in the kind. But the broader point was, it was during, of course, Holder's Justice Department that Paul was in the midst of, that couldn't carry out the work that you were able to do on a much smaller level. That was indicative of obviously a much bigger thing. And, to kind of speak to the audience that is growing, and I'm very, very happy to say that to all of you, especially with the eyeballs that are checking this out. So this is not falling on deaf ears, I can assure you. But what I'm trying to get through, particularly in this dialogue and forward, is that everyone is now beginning to finally talk about corruption. And I'm talking about the elite journalists. I'm talking about guys that, have been in government for a long time, but they're all literally talking in, tongues. They don't know how to articulate crime. They don't know how to articulate real things that you guys have been dealing with forever. And I'm going to turn this back to you, Paul, because you come out of, obviously, the go-go drug-infested Miami 80s and money laundering and all of the things that this apparatus would need, especially with international crime syndicates, to pull this off. So you know how that works. You get into healthcare fraud. You were involved with Enron. You're at the highest levels of the Department of Justice. You were going after AIG, which was a huge secret bailout of Goldman Sachs and other things at that time period. And I got to make this point because, again, the perspective of being a producer. I love to write screenplays. I love to watch films. I've watched them since my entire life, right? And so we as an American populace go nuts over true crime. We loved the Untouchables. You guys are the new Untouchables. We love the story of Elliot Ness. We love the story, of course, Al Capone and organized crime. We loved all of, everything from Martin Scorsese forward. It's not like we're, as a country, not aware of organized crime, but we all believed that the law had ensconced people like you who were professionals that would uphold the law, particularly against very complicated crime schemes that would make billions of dollars for the CEOs at the apex of the stuff. We all expected that. That's what I expected in my life, and that's what led me on this journey to discover you guys. And so, Paul, again, what you opened up with and what Bill said, can you, again, I think you did a great job at the beginning, but I don't want to reiterate the same question. But again, I don't think people can understand, unless they saw it in a movie laid out, the nightmare of enormous proportions that our largest body of law with unbelievable resources, the Department of Justice, could literally become a tool for a buffoon, orange-tarred president that said in an interview this week, guys, when asked, isn't it your number one priority to uphold the Constitution? And he literally said, I don't know about that. Give it to me straight, Paul.
Well, well, thank you, but I have a little bit of a different take on what June, sort of the story that June and Bill just told. And I think that while I absolutely agree that the Department of Justice and some of our regulatory agencies have not performed well over the past 15 years, I think that the issues that are prevalent today are not are not directly the result of that continuation of ineptitude, but are of an order of magnitude entirely different. And what do I mean? What I mean is, certainly, I think we all agree that we all saw the effectiveness and ability of the Department of Justice to do their job, sort of washed away over time. And we've talked about through all of the stuff you've done, all of the great work you've done. We talked about sort of how that happened, and sort of from my perspective, it was both ineptitude and politicalization and a whole sort of and a sort of lack of courage that led the Department of Justice to sort of I'm gonna overstate it, to be a toothless tiger when it came to elite white collar crime. I'm not overstating it too much, but what that did, in my opinion, is it gave the public a lack of the public had a lack of confidence in the ability of the Department of Justice to be effective. And I think what Republicans, and certainly the MAGA Republicans and the Trump administration, have done is they've capitalized on that lack of confidence, was born and bred through ineptitude and, in my opinion, politicization. And they've turned that on its head. So what I mean is, this is not just an inept Department of Justice anymore. Now they are specifically trying to wipe out the ability of Department of Justice to do anything with respect to elite white collar crime and attacking billionaires. And they're using the confidence deterioration that was brought about by Obama and Holder and all those people, and they're using that to say, see, they suck, and it's lawfare, and they're overcharging people that shouldn't be charged. So they're preying upon that deterioration to do an entirely different thing, not make it more effective, but make it entirely less effective in the ways it can go after people who commit these crimes, the way it can go after people who actually do these crimes. And I'll give you a couple of examples. They have now the 75,000 IRS agents that the Biden administration worked so hard to put back in, that would have been a boon to be able to bolster going after the tax crimes that billionaires consistently get away with. They're now emasculating that. They're taking that back away. And so the FCPA program that I used to oversee in the fraud section, they have basically turned that into a non-unit anymore. And Trump says, of course, that's because they make an unlevel playing field for the United States. The exact opposite, of course, is true. But the American people, rather than saying, this is all horse shit, this is now a corrupt enterprise that you are weakening and only using it to go after your political opponents, they are using the cover of, it was inept, it wasn't effective, and that's because it needs to be cleaned out by Elon Musk, and then then it'll be better. And we all know that's a false story. That is false in every way. But they've used the capitulation of the integrity over time that we had and how it deteriorated, and now they're using it to pulverize their ability to do their job. So I think that's sort of the point I'd like to make, is I think we are of an order of magnitude different, and what's going on now is disabling the ability to do that, purposefully disabling the ability to go after that crime, so that they can use that weakened department to allow them to do their corrupt activities, like what they're doing in crypto and what they're doing all over the world, as it relates to allowing kleptocrats to do what they do, so that Trump can also do it in this country. That's my view, and I think that's the way I look at it.
Mark, that's a perfect setup for conversations. I'm so glad you're here to pick that up, because, Bill and you obviously have incredibly detailed plans now to be able to do, unfortunately, what the Department of Justice isn't doing because of what Paul just ironed out. And obviously, what's so beautiful about it is that you've already done this again. Everybody's already done this stuff, right? But you did this. You took the resources that you had in the state of Ohio to be able to put together a huge apparatus to be able to take down a mid-level guy that was doing the same thing that obviously all of Wall Street is what was. So you're in a really interesting position to do that. But you also are looking at now as a couple of different things that you can diffuse, right? Let's just say the central power, the authority of the federal government through the Department of Justice to be able to handle elite white collar fraud has now been saturated or watered down because of what Paul had just illuminated. But there's a way to be able to put on our superhero outfits of the new Untouchables and deal with the reality through the structure and some of the mechanics that you've actually considered. Can you throw out some ideas in your reaction to what Paul just said in terms of moving forward?
Well, I mean, first of all, I had an epiphany. I was actually in a conference with a whistleblower, potential SEC whistleblower, and the epiphany was that these guys would probably be, at least at a minimum, ambivalent to crimes that were committed by people who aren't named Trump or Musk or Bezos or something. That I don't think they'd be against prosecuting them, but there's no the infrastructure that was there to carry this out on a kind of a civil service basis is gone. So there's nobody there to pick up the pieces. But they certainly wouldn't be against other people being prosecuted for white collar crimes. It's just as long as it's not their people. And I'm not sure they even have to be their enemies for that, but they're certainly not going to prioritize it. And certainly not going to, and certainly not even to the level that the prior administrations didn't do it. We'll be able to do it. But yeah, no. So I think what we have to do is look to who's out there. Look to law firms. Look to local prosecutors to bring cases. Counties and cities who are being pummeled now. I don't know if you saw D.C. Their attorney general brought a claim on the cuts in health and human services that I think is going to be, along with 18 other state AGs, and so they're picking their, and that's what I saw. I was at a conference with AGs this week in Chicago, and who are focused on consumer protection. But I think there's a strong consensus that they need to pick up the slack for what's going on in terms of consumer protection for sure, and in light of the demise of the CFPB. But I think you're seeing that starting to pop up. But the city of Cleveland should be bringing claims. They've had their HUD funding slashed, and they're not going to. And the Cleveland Metropolitan Housing Authority here is not going to be able to provide Section 8 vouchers to people who are going to now be homeless. And those Section 8 vouchers were authorized by Congress. And even wouldn't take much of a judge to see clearly that there was a clear legal duty that the administration had to enforce the laws passed by Congress, and there's a mechanism for that. It's called a writ of mandamus, and there are other extraordinary writs that are available to force them to do those things. So I'm hopeful that that's what's going to happen. The people that have standing, the people that were impacted. So let's take that standing argument away. Which they've been using, particularly when some of the public interest groups have popped up to do this enforcement. But focus on empowering and arming the people that are actually being harmed by this to rise up and bring those cases. And I think judges are willing will be willing to call the balls and strikes on this stuff if they get the opportunity, and it's teed up to them in a way that they're forced to actually deal with it, that they can't get rid of it on a technicality like standing or something like that.
Well, that blends exactly where Mr. Black's had it is also. But I want to turn this over to you, June, just quickly for a response from this perspective, Mark, and I hope you can maybe illuminate this further. Why not go after people like Elon Musk, if they've, or their apparatuses have somehow destroyed somebody through libel, and we find the whistleblowers, or we find the right people that are on the losing end of small business of the tariffs and so on and so forth. Can you take that a little bit step further? Because I'd love to hear June's response to that, and then hopefully, Bill, you can maybe fill in some of the blanks of obviously your amazing um, plan moving forward. But go ahead, Mark.
Okay. I thought we were going to June, but yeah. I mean, I think I mean, there was a testimony. I think I saw today or yesterday. There was a news conference on the Hill with a woman who's got 3 months of inventory sitting in her baby product factory in China. And she's got 2 months of inventory left here, and then she's going to be out of money and out of business, but still going to owe her SBA loans that are secured by her home. So she's in an existential fight, and there are going to be thousands of small business people that will be in that fight. They need to avail themselves of the court system, because again, you can't. These are tariffs are not in outside of emergency situations, which we are not in. Tariffs are not unilaterally imposed by the administration. And so, and we've got to call those bluffs. And I know that there's 100 things to do, but there's a lot of us out there that I think we can mobilize to do more of this stuff, whether they're the government lawyers at the state and local level, or it's or the private bar, on behalf of clients who are being disastrously and permanently harmed. So it's the tariffs, it's the cuts in Head Start. Those parents probably have some standing. And there's a congressionally allocated program that they're just simply not sending the money. Um, there's lots of opportunity here.
June, yeah, can you respond to some of the concepts that Mark has introduced?
Sure. And one thing I'd like to emphasize first, I doubt Bill and I disagree with Paul that this is a moment of existential crisis that dramatically different from what we've seen before. I still think it's the culmination of years of uh, plutocrats who see themselves able to act with impunity. And so when you now talk about what's necessary to successfully go after them, my fear is that we do need at least a recession and perhaps a global depression to trigger the will. And I want to give some precedents for that. In the savings and loan crisis, the initial people to be prosecuted were acquitted. In the Me Too movement, one of the things we found when we interviewed lawyers who brought sexual harassment cases is they marveled at how they could win cases today they couldn't win before the Me Too movement. Sexual harassment allegations tended to be dismissed as trivial. When you look at the financial crisis, the Justice Department did bring cases against Bear Stearns and lost in the criminal trials. And when we wrote our book, the introduction begins with Elon Musk. The book came out May 2024. It's before Doge. But we had selected Musk, and my friend who used to own a Tesla uh,
Mhm.
selected Musk as the poster child for what we were describing about in corporate America, the personality type, the narcissism, the disdain for having to follow the rules. And one of the things we talked about was how the SEC had gone after Musk for blatant securities violations. He is a walking, every day he breaks the law in some way, sometimes trivially, sometimes more seriously. Well, the SEC went after him and they got a settlement. The settlement was he had to pay a $20 million fine personally, and he could continue as CEO but couldn't be chairman of the board. Big deal. That's how Musk viewed it. And there was another case brought against Musk. I think this time a plaintiff's case. And it went all the way to trial. And again, the jury ruled for Musk. Now, why? Partly because the thing with white collar crime is there are often arcane cases where the jury doesn't I see the CEO as a bad guy. But what happened in the savings and loan crisis is once people saw it affect their pocketbooks, And once they understood there was a massive fraud at the core of it, they became willing to convict. In the Me Too movement, you can get convictions today, and you can have plaintiffs in civil employment cases win on cases they never could have won on years ago. And E. Jean Carroll, the person who accused Donald Trump of sexual assault, is an example of that. If she had tried to bring those allegations, civilly or criminally, at the time they occurred, nobody would have taken her seriously. And that's what we have to lay the groundwork for. So it is hard to go after an Elon Musk because he has vast resources. The Justice Department would never be in a position to command the resources to go after him he has at his fingertips. But they could bring him down because he's acts egregiously in violation of the law. What you need is a jury that understands that these violations, that are often sound tactical, in fact, are at the core of what is bringing down the US economy and perhaps the global economy and depriving people of their Social Security benefits. Um, getting that through to the public is often hard. And I will end on a note of irony. Who believes the system is corrupt? Trump supporters. I was invited to give a talk in rural Pennsylvania, and my host had written a book. She had gone out and interviewed the MAGA base, what became the MAGA base in rural Pennsylvania. And they believe the BS that both sides are corrupt. And I'm perfectly willing to say Democrats do lots of things I don't like. And a certain Senator Menendez is
Mhm.
totally corrupt. But the Biden crime family? Oh, come on. Biden has an alcoholic son who has traded on the family name and done some trivial things that every alcoholic in the country does. Um, what does Trump do? Trump is riffing off billions in plain sight, corrupting the entire US government and selling out our foreign policy interests in a way that the founding fathers feared and acting with total impunity. They are not the same. And the inoculation of the mega base to believe everybody is corrupt is part of the problem. They don't see people like all of you who have been in government longer than I was in government, who are in fact uncorruptible. And that's something we're missing.
Wow. And that's why you guys are the new Untouchables. And I know that you have to run and Bill probably has to run, so it might be too short on time. And I'm sure, Paul, you have to run. Mark, if you want to stick around and keep talking, I'd love to because I've got some more questions for you if you can give me a little bit more time. But
Yeah.
Bill, before we run out of the sand in the hourglass of this week's episode of the new Untouchables, do you want to touch upon what June just closed on, and then maybe give us a whatever you're comfortable with how you resolve this and how you respond to it.
Well, I
And
don't think we have time for the last one. We're literally flying to Oslo. Uh, but Paul, here's what I would say. This group is composed of people who succeeded in taking down extraordinarily powerful folks in incredibly difficult situations. So we ain't just talking theory. We ain't just talking history that we read somewhere. Uh, we still have in America more people like this, and fortunately, a number of them younger than me. Um, and so we can fairly rapidly, if there is a dedication to the restoration of an effective rule of law under a new president, we could accomplish that. But both parties have to give up their love affair with the political contributions of the billionaires and this absurd belief that they're geniuses, right? Huge chunk of them got there the old-fashioned way which is basically cheating, right? So, and like Musk, they're the opposite of being geniuses. Don't accept the whole framing of Doge that this has anything to do with efficiency. As Paul and I have been describing in June, this is all about an effort to further gut the rule of law and to take what remains and turn it into a weapon against honest people, against people that they dislike, against poor people. If you cared about the government, the title would have been Department of Government Effectiveness, because that's always the issue. And you heard Paul talk about we have finally restored some capacity to the IRS. Now, each of those IRS folks Paul was talking about, net makes for the United States of America probably in the order of $20 million. So when you slash them, is that efficiency? No. It's trying to create a criminogenic environment in which our buds get off without paying our appropriate taxes and with effective immunity from prosecution, and who will kick back enough in the way of contributions and other favors to keep us in power, right? So stop talking about it like this is an effort to increase efficiency. It's an effort to destroy the rule of law in America. And it's too damn successful, in large part because the way the regular media and even much of social media it is just keeps talking about it as to how many dollars he saved. He hasn't saved any dollars. He's cost us hundreds of billions of dollars. And if he weren't stopped by some lawsuits, it would have been a far bigger loss. So that's my take.
Well, you guys have a great trip to Oslo. Paul, I'll leave it to you if you want to say one last word, because I do, with that big tower in the background, you do look like a superhero from Boston.
Yeah.
Do you want to be Big Poppy or Ted Williams in this
Mhm.
case, and give us the grand slam for this week? And just because Bill and June and Mark and you all have all said it, but you're all the top level attorneys that have worked at the highest levels of the United States to take down massive, massive corruption for decades. And now, after all of that incredible work that you've done, understood what Bill said, it's not easy to pull this off, but we're looking at Donald Trump. This guy is an idiot. I don't have any expletives to continue how ridiculous it is that this guy is getting away with what he's getting away with.
Okay, you've teed him up. I'll just
Yep.
do it, phrase it my way. Call your shot,
All
Paul.
right, thank you. So two things. One, I absolutely agree with Bill said that what they have done is disabled and are disabling Department of Justice and law enforcement from doing its job in the United States. That's what they've done, and it's working, and they're doing it every day. And then I agree with what June said. And what June said is the only thing that's going to fix this is for this country to go in an economic depression and have the MAGA people, in my opinion, realize that all of what they're doing, all of what MAGA is doing, the government's doing, and Trump is doing, is hurting them. It's hurting them, and it's hurting them in the pocketbook, and it's hurting them in many different ways. So I do think that those are the two takeaways for me as well.
Well, I will say that's it for now. Mark, if you care to stay on, I would love you to. And I will say goodbye to everybody else for the moment.
Thanks.
Peace out.
Um, Mark, okay,
Yeah.
a powerful thing there, but I do want to pick up on what Paul, said. Okay, so do you agree with him that the only way we're going to get out of this mess is if everybody absolutely experiences a disaster on par with the Great Depression and then subsequently World War II? Is that the only way out of this, Mark?
I hope not. I mean, I think that's it's going to be. I mean, it will be devastating, and you know, folks don't have the problem is at the very same time that they're attacking the rule of law, they're also dismantling the social safety net. And so, we're talking about a depression, people experiencing the depression the way they experienced the depression in 1929, without the benefit of health insurance, or without Medicaid or health insurance. I mean, they're talking about scaling that back so dramatically, without the ability to get benefits for food, because they're talking about scaling that back and making it work dependent. And in a recession, that's about the worst thing you could do. That the people's subsidies for housing are going to be going away. There's going to be they've introduced inefficiency in the administration of Social Security, and so that's another layer of the social. So all those things that were built between 29 and now are not going to be there. So the pain, I'm afraid, would be too great, and there might be an overreaction and even more of an embrace of the guy with the simple answers, who is Trump. So I think we have to stop that from happening. I think we need to fight these things step by step, as they're going on. I still believe enough in the rule of law and the strength of our Constitution to believe that we can do two things at once, and that's one of the things we have to do. So because I don't know how we ever pull out of that depression, if it happens, and then China will seize the moment, and Russia could potentially seize the moment, and suddenly we're a third-rate power. And now our physical safety becomes in danger because we won't have the. I mean, you can't have people working. You can't pay a military. You can't keep us safe. And if the U.S. is power. I mean, we've already given up the soft power that we have in the world, by the influence that we had by our generosity and our support of a global community, both economically and socially. But now we're going to give up. But so it's too ugly to even think about. I don't think any of us want to see that happen.
Well, let me just kind of finish off with this then, because I got to
Yeah.
blend because I've had two conversations separately, but I do see a synergy between you and some new information that Bill is laying out. But I want to kind of hit the rewind because this is just kind of a, shall we say, foreshadowing of hopefully things that you and I could discuss publicly, moving forward. But like you had proposed and responded to my question a couple of minutes ago, there are ways to use the diffuse nature of democracy in different districts to bring cases that would, that had standing, that would have the proper narrative to respond to either the tariff loss, as you pointed out, or people responding to libel potentially vis-a-vis some of the most powerful plutocrats in this country, as Bill likes to refer to it. Can you address that first?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, you and I got into a conversation over the weekend about the potential use of libel law, the effort to either through litigation or legislatively, uh, uh, get rid of the 220 exemption for websites, so that they can be held accountable for the content that gets blasted across them. And create a world where so libel laws were designed to create a world that's safe for truth. And other countries have done a much better job of leveraging their libel and defamation laws, to make that actually happen, because there are real consequences to people speaking, talking about things and lying. I mean, something as simple as saying, no, I didn't put a meme up of myself as the Pope. When everybody saw the meme he put up as himself as the Pope. I don't know whether there's constitutional protections. That's the lawyers. So going after the lawyers, I think, is going to be part of it. He was Sunday morning as I watched Kristen Welker interview Trump. All I could think about was that he laid every single thing off on the Justice Department and his lawyers. And if those lawyers are going to take positions in court that are contrary to law, then they ought to not be practicing law. If they're going to take positions that are and advise the President of the United States to violate the Constitution, then I think that we as a profession need to deal with them. And those mechanisms. So there's the disciplinary rules, there's the enforcement of libel and slander laws, there's the use of extraordinary writs that are available under federal constitutional law to force the executive to execute on the policies that have been enacted by Congress. I mean, one would think that members of Congress would want that. And it really is kind of scary because there were, even as frustrating as it was, in the financial crisis, at least the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, were both determined to protect the prerogatives of their branch of government, as were the courts, as was the executive. But for whatever reason, the party that's in the majority in both houses has ceded that they are no longer defending their institutions, their constitutional. They're not defending Article 3 from Article 1 from Article 2, and in Article 3 is at the highest level in the Supreme Court, is sometimes taking a dive on those things, at least in the short term. So it is that's something I don't think the founders ever contemplated. But the fact is that a decision of Congress creates a right that an executive doesn't have the right to take away. The executive has a duty to execute on the laws that are passed by Congress, and if he doesn't do it, then the people that are the intended beneficiary of that law have standing to attack it. We haven't had to do that. And it's new, but it's not. It's new, but it's kind of baked into our system.
Very cool. Well, but then again, that goes into the stories, the right people that are the choices that have standing that we can bring attention to, and then potentially work in a distributive way. Look, I didn't get a chance to say this with the other guys on, and I'll just say this as kind of a popular culture reference, okay? But something's happened recently on the Disney Channel that nobody would have ever thought possible because of who Disney is. Yeah. Now, Disney took their brand, Star Wars, which of course is, the Rolls Royce of their brands in terms of money making, and they've taken a very courageous stance to do a new series, at least in season 2, called Andor. And it is remarkably parallel to everything that we're experiencing as a society. Millions of people are talking about this on social media. Millions of people are watching it, and it's creating a stir because it seems to actually echo all of the things that are happening in the 24-hour cycle with all of these monstrosities of, Doge and Trump and all of the rest of it that's leading to these things. But what the magnitude of the storyline is that the diffuse nature of the resistance, of the rebellion that spreads out, is able to, of course, within the Force and all of these other things, light versus evil, good versus evil, that sort of thing, make it such that the empire in all of its, fascism, if you will, can't control. And that's where the presence is. And so what you're describing, in my estimation, and also what Bill is talking about we'll talk about it weeks in advance. It's just at the very beginning of this whole thing. But since the Department of Justice is what we described, since the FBI is not doing its job, which you had to do, obviously, in the great financial crisis and so forth, what you're demonstrating once again is a distributive way to be able to build a consensus amongst the public and the jury of the American people to hopefully electrify them such that they cannot be lied to anymore in a way in which we do nothing. That the response literally builds the momentum, correct?
Yeah, I agree. And, it was a little like when in the beginning of the financial crisis when the state bar and the chief justice and in my office got together and to mobilize, thousands of lawyers to represent people whose homes were being foreclosed on for free. When you talk about a distributive system, we need to take all those lawyers who are sitting at home, traumatized and hiding under their or the tall building firm lawyers that are, hiding under their desks and get them out. And the ones that have the courage to resign, let's give them some work to do. And bring these cases and so there should be a flood of these things going on. And I can't believe that there isn't, but there's just so much to absorb so quickly. And there's not in the Democratic Party, which the loyal opposition, which should be the conduit by which this stuff gets organized. That's not what they're doing. They're just sending text messages asking us for money, and half of which is going to go to their consultants, I presume. So yeah, that's what we got to do. That and how that happens, it may need to happen in a very distributive way. That it's not just one organization, it's not just one bar association. It's all of them or lots of them in different places.
But you and your law firm are willing to take a stand and hopefully become a magnet to some of these stories to help to get these things out there, correct? So
yeah, well, right. And build, like we talked when we used to organize campaigns back in the 80s, talked about building concentric circles. We need to build concentric circles with other folks, but because the principles that would apply to the cutoff of Section 8 housing money are the same principles that would apply to the decision that the administration made to stop sharing of surplus food with food banks, or the decision that they've made to, or by a little different concentric circle, the protections from tariffs, that the fact that absent an emergency, Congress is only allowed to enact. And so those principles all kind of build on one another, and it's an act of civil disobedience. And then we have to have actual acts of civil disobedience where people don't follow these directives, where they protect their neighbors who are about to be arrested by ICE wrongly. And not fight for them to not fight the battle of the substance of whether that person has the right to be living in the United States, but whether that person has a right to the due process of law to find out whether they have the right to live in the United States. I think everybody in America is starting to understand that. I think people understand due process of law better in 2025 than they ever have in the history of the United States. And so we have a debt to owe Trump for that at least. And so let's find ways that we can safely and constructively disobey.
I love it. I love it. So folks, if you're out there, share, subscribe, reach out to me. I can help, be sort of a filter, if you will, to get stories if you've been a victim of the tariffs or of some sort of libel from some sort of powerful source within the Republicans particularly. But to Mark's point, to all of the rest of us who expect the Democrats to be able to handle this, again, the whole subject of this discussion so far, Mark, right, in this however many episodes of the new Untouchables we're into, was to define and to discern and to reveal that the Department of Justice is a tool of a lawless presidency. In what world does that make sense? The world we live in, where corruption is taken over. And this is what happens in third world countries, not the United States of America. And so if people like Mark Dan, who are professionals who have an incredible track record of this whole thing, are willing to step into the light to draw in and be a magnet for these cases, and that we also have to find folks out there like Mark with, obviously law firms that are willing to get into the fray. And I do want to point this out, and I think I'll close with this because I want to give you the last comment here, but please, people, send me your stories. Reach out to me. I'll leave a link to Mark's law firm below. You can reach out to him as well. We'll start to aggregate this stuff. We'll start to move it into position. We've got some of the greatest legal firepower in the United States that's not being heard. And I'll finish off with this note. So last week, it was a big deal that 60 Minutes had propped up, if you will, Mark Elias. Mark Elias is the attorney that was the lead attorney for the Clinton presidency back in 2016. And he's worked closely with Eric Holder, obviously in the courts dealing with election issues and fairness and integrity in elections and probably gerrymandering some of the other things. But as it relates to the tall building law firms, we can assure you people that Covington and Burling has a very cloudy relationship with finance, for example. Okay. And so when Mark Elias is propped up by 60 Minutes in this notion of he's not capitulating, and I'm not saying this to degrade Mark Elias. I like Mark Elias. I like what Mark Elias is doing. Mark Elias isn't attacking corruption. He is not attacking the nature of what all of this constitutes. And there are many other attorneys, particularly within our group here, the new Untouchables, that know how to deal with corruption better than anybody in the United States and the world. There's no question about that.
In defense of Mark Elias, if there's anything more important than protecting the rule of law, it's protecting the integrity of elections.
Agreed. And
the work you're doing is irreplaceable. And again, there need to be concentric circles. There needs to be, every state needs their own Mark Elias. And needs the support of whether it's nonprofits or crowdfunding or however it takes. We brought a case here. I'll give you an example of a case we've been doing for 4 years now. In 2021, the governor cut off supplemental unemployment benefits available through the CARES Act to people unemployed in Ohio for the last 10 weeks of the program. Because he decided that would help employers fill jobs that were empty, and that people were clearly just staying home and accepting unemployment in lieu of working for the $300 extra a week that they were getting for that, which is an absurd premise. But we started that case. We had to post a bond initially for a TRO, and the unemployed folks crowdfunded money to put up for a bond. We are almost at the point now where the I believe the Court of Appeals and very shortly is going to order the governor to rescind that letter. And believe it or not, the money is available still at the in the Labor Department. It was appropriated without a year attached to it. So if the governor sends a letter, the Labor Department's legally obligated to pull that money and send it to the state of Ohio to send on to the 330,000 people that are out of pocket $3,000. But they mobilized and they organized and they brought this stuff to our attention, and we took on the case, and we're not exactly sure how we're going to get paid. Although a number of them have suggested that they should take a little bit of the $3,000 and pay us, which would be very kind, but not what we not what we're in this business for. But it's been the greatest experience I've had as a lawyer, and I've had some good ones, to help people in this situation, to give them a little glimmer of hope in a world where for somebody who were unemployed during the pandemic, many working class people still haven't pulled themselves out of it. So there's great gratification in that as well. And the fact is, so many of those people have hired my law firm to do other things over the last couple of years. So I never expected that. But that's something that was, so they have consumer problems, they have bankruptcy issues, they tell their friends that there's these lawyers out there that are doing this thing. So I have a story I can tell to other firms that want to take on, if every firm just takes on one little cause like that, think of what we could accomplish. There's 7,000 lawyers in Cleveland.
Well, that's amazing, because again, what people need to understand, short of a revolution,
Yeah.
The only way we get out of this and get our country back without a lot of people dying, honestly, is when attorneys who are on the side of law, real law and order, and obviously integrity and liberty and justice for all, lean into this massive power grab of corruption and collusion that has completely hijacked the United States in a way that, had I not gone through the work we've done on the con, and I will say to everyone trying to get more context into who this guy Mark Dan is, watch the con. Understand what Mark Dan and his teams of his associates did that nobody in the country did. And then you can understand where we're coming from here. And you can see that at www.thecon.tv. But along those lines, again, just to close out of here, for anybody who heard what I said about Mark Elias, I'm not disparaging Mark Elias. What he's doing is incredibly important. There's a lot of incredible attorneys out there, though, with plans that are doing something the Democratic Party has not done, and they're not going to do. And there's more to it that will roll out in weeks and months moving forward. But I think on that note, we certainly covered a lot today, Mark, and I appreciate it. Any closing words, or are you good?
No, thank you, Patrick. I'm sure we'll talk again.
Have a wonderful weekend and all the best to everyone. Take care. Bye now.